Hello and welcome to 365 Explained. This is our pilot podcast, test podcasts, dipping our toes in the water. This is something that Zach and I'll introduce Zach in a second, have been talking about for a little while. And the idea behind it is that every time we record, carefully not saying monthly, weekly, we'll see how schedules dictate. But we will pick an item in the M365 or broader 365 ecosystem. So something from the world of Office or Azure or one of those kind of components that we will not necessarily deep dive into, but take a closer look at, try and explore, try and explain, try and understand how that fits into the broader picture. And the idea is that we will push the boundaries of our knowledge into the kind of deeper and darker corners of Azure in particular for the pair of us. But kind of over time, we will flesh out a reasonable understanding of the ecosystem. So that's what we're here for. I should introduce myself. My name is Ben. My background is as an M365 consultant. Kind of my background is from Skype for Business and Teams and that UC world. And that is where I know Zach from. So, Zach, hello, who are you and how do you fit in?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I'm Zach Zach Bennett. I'm a Microsoft Teams MVP, and again, very similar sort of world to Ben around the consulting. Came into it a little bit later than Ben did,
Are you saying I'm
not
old?
so much.
Grizzled,
um,
experienced?
yeah, experience. Yeah, let's take
Yeah,
experience.
thanks.
But specifically around the teams, and that's kind of when I jumped straight into the Microsoft ecosystem when that came out. And yeah, I think today we've chose Loop to talk about, haven't we,
We
Ben?
have. So
So
go on then. Do you
yeah,
want to fill me in? What is Loop? I've heard of it, but I'm not entirely sure what it is.
yeah. So Loop is a application brought out by Microsoft, and where I kind of see what Loop is, it's a couple of different mechanisms that kind of slot together. And if you're used to using anything like maybe OneNote or Notion, that sort of application where you can either do to-do lists or that sort of thing, but this is more something that you can share kind of with your organization as
So it's a
well, work
note
on things
keeping app
together.
or
Yeah, I'd say note keeping, or more like a project kind of. It's hard to explain, but a good place to keep everything together, if that makes
yeah, so
sense.
what it like it's kind of a cross between OneNote and a whiteboard and document versioning through SharePoint is kind of a bad way of explaining it. But the reason I'm putting SharePoint in there is like, do you remember the good old days? This might be before your time, where you used to have a document and you'd email it around and you'd end up with like version
Yeah,
3, version 4, version final, version Ben, whatever. And then we kind of got to the golden age of Office 365 where you could store files online, and that file was the core source, right? You didn't have to mail
yeah,
the file around. You had a link back to that document. And anytime anybody from their email or in Teams opened it, it got back to the source. Loop's kind of like that, right? That it's disembodied Office components that you can share into other locations for people to work on. So like if that's the kind of sharing aspect, what can you actually have inside a Loop file then? Why is it an Office component?
yeah. I think you kind of hit one of the key points as well. Um, Loop is made up of components, pages, and workspaces,
Mhm.
and we'll kind of come into maybe explain those a little bit more in a little bit. But one of the great things with Loop is where it can be shared. So because it's kind of tightly wove into the Microsoft ecosystem, like you said, you can share these components or parts of Loop in Microsoft Teams meetings, in chats, in SharePoint, across Power Apps, that sort of thing. So it's kind of widespread,
Yeah.
and they're all synced as well. So you update a component that you've put into a SharePoint site, that's going to update the Teams channel. That's going to update, the chat, everything all at
Yeah, would
once.
would you say synced is the right terminology though? Because I don't think Loop has the notion of offline capabilities, does it? It's like you're almost always you're viewing the original source, so it's not like there's a back end kind of synchronization. It's just it's always showing you whatever the original file is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're always all online now. You're never offline, are you, Ben?
I don't
You're
know. The
always
network around me was being dodgy last night, so
yeah, but yeah, I mean, synced is a word that Microsoft use.
yeah.
That you can pass these, keep these components synced together. But yeah, it's a good point.
So
Um, Maybe viewing it more of a master
well,
file or
I
a
guess
master
the point is you
location.
never have to hit refresh, right? Like you know,
Exactly.
if
Yeah,
you go
that's a
in and
good
you
point.
type something, I will see what you are typing, regardless of where I am viewing that loop component on the mobile app, subject to connectivity, or in the
Yeah.
component inserted into Teams or into a meeting invite or wherever it may be, right? So what's the actual underlying component then? Like there is a file that exists for loop, isn't it? It's a dot loop, I believe.
Yeah, yes. So there is this dot loop file, and if you say you're in like a Teams chat with someone, you can kind of add a component into that chat, and then it's on your type of message
Yeah.
bar, with whoever you're talking to. Say where you would add like an emoji or uh, into the actual chat message, you can add that component into
Mm.
there. Um, I don't know, Ben, if you've played about with the actual file format itself. I mean, I've not.
I've not opened
If
one and
anything,
explored it outside of, I've only ever opened them kind of as loops, and I guess it's kind of a requirement there, isn't it? That the loop, the engine that makes all of this possible is the fact that that dot loop file lives in your OneDrive or in your SharePoint, depending on where you are sharing and
yeah,
creating those files, and that's kind of the underlying mechanism that allows this to happen. Like Loop is very much one of those products that back in the day we used to have kind of the core pillars of like Exchange and SharePoint and Skype for Business turned into Teams, and then you had these things that took advantage of the functionality on top of it. Loop is like one of those kind of pinnacle things, isn't it? That it's using all these other underlying technologies to make it possible, which is kind of nice. So shall I share my screen into this and we'll have a little look through um, of what this actually looks like. So for those who are watching on video, sorry, I'm going to be eyes to the left because that's where my screen is. But so where do we get to Loop? Where do we find it? Do we just go to office.com or loop.com? Where do we go?
so there's a web version, loop.microsoft.com. It's a good place to start if you wanted to go to that. So just in your browser. There's also a Loop app, which I mean,
It's one of those PWA apps, isn't it? It's effectively a
yeah,
wrapper for
exactly.
for the website. Like I've got the app up on my screen, and if I go click on the top corner, you can see I've got the Edge extension menus
Yeah,
kind of showing up in
yeah.
there. So it's a badly disguised
It's an
PWA,
app.
but that doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah,
So as I
yeah,
open Loop up, then I've got some options down the left hand side where I've got like a little flyout menu. I can search across my loops. I've got notifications for where stuff has been updated or changed. I've got a quick menu to view recent pages and components. And this is where Loop is a little confusing with its terminology, right? Of like what is a component versus what's a page versus what's a workbook. And then I've got this kind of separate thing of ideas. This is kind of interesting that ideas is a little bit like sticky notes in OneNote. So you have your
yeah,
normal kind of OneNote notebooks and pages, and then you have sticky notes that are kind of stored as part of your OneNote but separate. Loop seems to have a similar thing that you have this kind of more fluid ideas space. And then, interestingly, we have a specific kind of call out for meeting notes because I'm right in thinking that Loop is the default mechanism for storing notes in a Teams meeting nowadays.
yeah, yeah, yeah. If I clicked into mine, because I've been using Loop a little bit internally, I can see when I go under my meeting note section, it's effectively basically all my meetings,
Yeah,
that people have added notes into and that sort of thing. So yeah,
good stuff. And then in the main body of this, I've got a nice good morning with an animated cloud. That's always friendly. Then I have these three things. I've got workspaces, recent components, and pages and ideas. Ideas is the same section as I had kind of down the left hand side, and then recent is kind of just this list of these things that I have worked on. But what's workspaces all about? Do you fill us in on what
yeah.
that's for?
Yeah, so we mentioned those there's kind of three parts to Loop. You've got your components. These components that I mentioned before, these are like snippets of content, right? These are the parts that could be shared around, added into meeting chats, that sort of thing. Then you have the pages itself. So pages are something that you would go into your Loop app and start creating.
Right.
Um, these are more pages that you can put maybe key information to a particular topic. I don't know, um, welcome to the team, something like that that you wanted to kind of keep up to date and add information into. Then you would share those around your organization, and people can edit and collate that information if you wanted. Those pages are the parts that can be embedded into M365 apps, or sent out as share links, that sort of thing. um, and then lastly, you have those workspaces. The workspaces are more of the shared spaces that you're going to be working with people in real time, making changes to a document. That's more of the kind of progress
Yeah.
tracker, or you're working with other people to get towards one common goal. Easy, like a project, for example. If you wanted to run a kind of project team or an initiative in a project, a workspace would be a good place to do that.
Okay. So kind of in practical applications, then a page can contain a component, but it also can contain elements that are just part of the page and not a specific component.
Yeah.
When we want to insert Loop into another app, which we'll talk about in a minute or two, that can either be the component or the page itself. And then the pages roll up into workspaces, and I can choose to share an individual component or a page or a workspace. I think that's right. So kind
Yep.
of one of
Yep.
one of my use cases is I will for I'm a consultant, deal with various different customer workloads and projects and things, is I will make a page for the particular project or the customer that I am working from, but then I have a personal workspace that is called current projects, and then inside that workspace I don't need to share that with anybody, but I can
Mm.
attach the different pages from wherever they are into my workspace for my project, so I know that I open that workspace and that I can see all of the different projects I'm working on and I can add and remove them. But unlike a OneNote notebook, that fixes that hierarchy for everybody else in OneNote, whereas in Loop that is my hierarchy. But if I had a particularly complex or challenging project that had a load of pages and sub information, I could share that entire workspace with everybody else in my team, right? So this kind of fits to that message of Microsoft's giving you the tooling and lots of different choices, and how you choose to interact with it and deal with it is kind of down to your preference, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably a good spot to talk around the sharing aspect as
Hmm.
well. So, I don't know if you know, Ben, but who if I wanted to go and share this workspace with people, um, how can I do that inside a Loop?
So I am on screen at the moment. Just I'm using Copilot because Copilot exists in Loop to I've made a blank workbook called Current Projects. I've made a page, and I've asked Copilot to give me some content for Please Explain MFA like I'm a 5 year old. Um, so it's given me quite a
Nice.
cute explanation. Actually, imagine you have a treasure box with a special toy inside. Blah 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 blah. So anyway, this is my component that I have created. Right. So up the top of my screen, I have the option to copy this page as I see it now as a loop component. And I also have another kind of little, almost like a flower petal icon that when you click on it goes to like a little rectangle. If I click on that, it shows me the different locations where this component is. And I also have the option to add that into a workspace if I wanted anywhere else. So your question is, how can I share and deal that with that? I also have the option of share. I can click on it and I can choose to again make it a loop component, or I can do page link. If I do page link, this pops open the kind of very familiar standard M365 sharing link like you would get on a Word document or an Excel file or anything like that. But interestingly, I've got slightly restricted choices here. I can share with people inside my tenant, I can share only with people who have existing access, or I can share to specific people. What There's something missing here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's external, right?
Yeah.
It's with people not in your organization.
So I guess this is a similar thing to like Copilot can't work outside your organizational boundaries. Loop at this point in time also can't go cross organization, but I believe that is something that they are working on and figuring out.
Yeah,
But it's there's going to be a huge spider's web worth of permissions and things that need to
yeah,
be figured out underneath there. So what I'm going to do though insteid is I'm going to say I want to copy this as a loop component. Um, and then if I go into maybe my email, and I've got a new email here, what I want to look out for is in places where you can insert loop components, there's a little kind of loop. How would you describe that? It's like a stylized P with no tail.
yeah, yeah.
It's kind of like
It's
a
a
cross
loop
between an
icon.
O and a P, I suppose. Which
Yeah,
actually, behind me on the video, I've got my Loop Stanley mug, or well, it's not actually a Stanley mug, but whatever it is, that was swag from being over in Seattle last year, which was quite nice. Anyway, so you look for the locations where I've got this little P here, and I've got different loop components. Now, this is what you were talking about, right? That we didn't really dive into,
yeah,
that a component can contain multiple things. We've got bulleted lists, we've got paragraphs, we've got tables, we've got a Q&A, progress tracker, a Kanban board. Um, but I think, hopefully, off my clipboard, because I know that I can insert loop components into this email, if I actually paste, woohoo, that has pasted in this kind of magical loop component. This
yeah,
loop component has the little colored loop icon in the top corner. It's got the title of the page, and then it's got like a little kind of cursor tracker, which if I hop onto my other window, uh, I can't get back to my thing. Create a component. Where's it gone? I'm floundering around trying to find my current projects and my MFA untitled page. Here we go. Let's give my page MFA explained. But if I come in here and start adding text and then go immediately back to my email, you can see that that's updated on the fly.
yeah.
So it's kind of like you have in Word where you can see, paragraph locking, you can see where people are, etc. So now that I've got that as my loop component, I guess this is one of the issues, right? If I come into our Teams chat, and you and I have got a little kind of background chat that we've been having. If I pull that up on screen and go into chats and I find my message with you, um, I can paste in my loop, but it's not actually blown it up into a loop component this time, even though I do have the option to insert a loop component. If I click on the option to insert a loop component, I've got this warning message telling me external users aren't able to view it. I can click manage access, and basically I'm going to get an error because this is that issue of I still can't share this to an external party. So UI wise and workflow wise, there's a few things to kind of figure out here, isn't there? That it's not great, but if we're just dealing internally, it's not a problem. So
Yeah.
go on.
One thing that I was thinking for a use case of this is, let's say you are running a project and you send a to do list,
Mhm.
or I'm going to get these things done today, something like that. You can send the email with the loop component in there with the
Yeah,
list. Uh, if whoever you've sent it to comes to it an hour after, they may see none of those things are ticked off. They come to it, at the end of the day, they can already see it's updated automatically. Those components are now ticked off. They don't have to send an email to say, "Oh, hey, have you gone through and finished all of these?" They kind of know automatically. They don't need to reach out and rehash those questions.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I
so
was
it's
going to
really
kind of
nice.
get to what are our favorite use cases for it. That's meeting agendas are my favorite use case for this, right? So you obviously you Copilot it up to the gills, right? You go ask Copilot for, hey, help me create an agenda for this meeting, find out what's up to date, and then you can copy that and paste it into your meeting invite so that your meeting invite, anybody who's invited to the meeting, if they're internal only, can then
Yeah,
contribute and update and deal with it. Um,
yeah,
that's another interesting use case, actually, one that we haven't talked about. If I go into Copilot, which I've got in my Teams, when I ask Copilot a question, so how would you describe Microsoft Loop and where it should be used? And I'm going to make sure, good practice, that I have my internet searching is available. Microsoft is keeps changing where this is. Anyway, so let's hit go on that. Another interesting use case of where Microsoft is pushing and embedding Loop is when I get my answer saying, use cases for Loop, project management, brainstorming, content creation. Can you see at the bottom of my response, I've now got the option alongside copy to edit in pages. That pushes that text of that answer into a Loop component. So I've now got my title, how would you describe blah blah blah, Microsoft Loop, blah blah blah. I've got my answers, I've got my references. That is now, if I go back into Loop and went to my recent component, you will see that component has been stored in
Oh,
my OneDrive and has been pushed over into the ideas portion of Loop. So it used to be, if we needed to interact or share or work on an output from Copilot, you had to copy the text, put it into Word, put it into somewhere else. They've now got this integration that it will push straight from Copilot into Loop, which I think is pretty cool, pretty neat.
yeah, that's really cool. And one of the cool things is you weren't in the Loop app creating that talking to Copilot. You were in the Teams
Yep.
app talking to Copilot. So it goes somewhere completely different, and it still kind of gives you that notion of uh, Loop is available kind of everywhere.
Yeah.
It's probably a good point to talk around licensing and especially Copilot licensing. To my understanding, to use this Copilot features inside of Loop, you need to have the is it M365 Copilot license, so Copilot for M365 plan.
Yep.
Um, so you need to have that add-on license
Yeah,
to be
so
able
so
to use that.
because Loop is technically one of the Office 365 products, the Copilot for M365 license unlocks it through the 365 suite. So that includes this. But there was actually something you discovered when we were testing this, right? So my account here is an M365 E5 account. So I've got all of this good stuff. You didn't. What happened for you?
Yeah, so I went to go and have a play around with Loop, and it turns out my user in my organization has the Office 365 E5 licensing plan assigned to it, so not the
Yeah.
M365 E5. Um, Turns out I don't get access to the workspaces features that you have inside of Loop. That is an M365 only
Which
feature.
strikes me as a weird line in the sand. Like, I don't quite understand why workspaces. I mean, maybe they're thinking that that's more advanced collaboration and that on the O license it's more a personal productivity tool. But it feels a bit weird because, like, that example that I talked about, taking it out of Copilot, like up on my screen, I've got, where do I want to add this? I want to add it into my workspace. I'm going to put it in my current project. It's now, that's like that's getting me to use Loop more. It's not like it's a super fancy, complex
Yeah,
security feature, or that's normally the delimiter for O versus M licensing.
yeah.
So yeah, that's strange. Anyway, right, I will stop my screen share there, and I think we shall kind of bring this home, shall we? Um,
Yeah.
so I guess one of the things I've struggled with is how I should use Loop versus the other components of M365, right? So to me, using Loop versus using Word is an obvious use case, because if I need stuff to be fluid and constantly updating and things like meeting agendas, don't use Word, because you have to go in and out of the document and
Yeah.
open Word and blah blah. Loop's just nice, it's there, it's inserted as part of it. What's your take on using Loop versus OneNote? I've got an answer for this, but I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah. I actually took a step away from OneNote quite a while ago.
Okay.
I know you were quite,
Boo.
probably still are quite an extensive user of OneNote, um, and I've jumped around lots of different tools to try it, and some non-Microsoft ones. I mentioned Notion
Yeah.
before. In all honesty, that's what I'm using now as my kind of note taking,
Well,
and
you set up a Notion for us figuring out this podcast, right? And that
yeah,
external sharing is why we're not using Loop, because we're working cross organization, and yeah.
yeah, yeah. But it's a couple of things. If I want to use Loop fully, I would need to get the M365 license in, I feel, because it's really annoying that I see all those features that you're sharing, and I I still have those options, but as soon as I try and get into a workspace, it goes,
Yeah.
no, no, no. Like you're missing that part, which is quite frustrating. Um, but yeah, it's got a lot. I do really like those components and being able to, update them in one place and they be updated
Yeah.
everywhere, or the kind of the features of live updating is really nice to have. Like you said, agendas is a perfect one.
Mm.
Don't be storing those kind of meeting notes and agendas in Word anymore, and sharing them via email if they are, um, available via Loop. It's such a nice experience to kind of see those tasks and things update on the fly, or another thing, you know, capturing meeting notes. Sometimes, dare I say this, Copilot doesn't get it exactly right. So if you want to jump in and just say, oh no, I just want to change, what that output was from the meeting or something like that. If it's stored in a Loop component, you could do that very easily.
Yeah.
But if it's in an email, it's, I have to send the email and say, oh, that actually wasn't the takeaway, or can I please update this? There's use cases like that I think are really strong. I kind of went away from your point there, Ben,
That's all
but
right.
what do you think around the whole OneNote? Because I knew you were a big,
Well, I still
big
was. I have a funny to me story about OneNote when I was over in MVP Summit last year, where there was a Loop meeting and a OneNote get together on the last day, and the Loop meeting was nicely busy. The OneNote meeting, it turned out I was the only person there other than the product team. Just sat around a table with like 5, 6, 7 other OneNote people, all like, "So how do you use it and what do you do?" And it's like, ah, but no, I've loved OneNote for a long time. I think to me, using Loop versus Notion, right? That is down to your security boundaries and all that good stuff. Like, so Loop,
Yeah,
because it is inside your tenant, inside your environment, you have all of the protections afforded you by the broader M365 ecosystem. Whereas using a third-party external service, fine if that's gone through your internal corporate due diligence. So Loop for personal productivity and personal usage outside of company stuff, probably not a great fit. Maybe use one of the other tools inside your organization for internal sharing and internal collaboration. Perfect. Loop versus OneNote, to me, they still have a place side by side. And this is a question I see quite often from people, like, well, where should I use it? Why should I use OneNote? Because that's the old guard and Loop's the new way of doing stuff. To me, there's kind of this notion in personal productivity around kind of having a third brain, right? Or a second brain. We've already got one second brain, where you store stuff and you can reference it and you can call back to it. And tools like Notion and other stuff are great for that. But that to me is what OneNote is for. OneNote is my library, it's my personal archive. It is, here's a web clipping that I thought was useful. I'm going to save that. Here's a link to something that I want to work on or want to look at. Here is the outline of stuff that I need to do when we're talking about podcasts before I share it to somebody else. And don't get me wrong, you
yeah,
can still share in OneNote, but the experience is not as good as the Loop experience. Whereas Loop is more of a transient stuff I am working on at the moment, stuff that is current, stuff that I need to have in that fluid format. And then when something is finished or sorted, I would probably transfer that into OneNote. And I believe I don't know if you can at the moment, but coming is the ability to have Loop inside OneNote, which is a whole nother layer. But OneNote's my reference archive, and Loop is my stuff I am working on at the moment in the moment. That's kind of how I use those two cross compatibly.
yeah.
So
Okay.
do we have anything else to get into? I think we've kind of confused everybody to death there. I'm aware we're knocking up on 30 minutes. That's about where we were looking for these things.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just say if you're on the fence about Loop Up, sorry, that's
You
where
want
I
to slip in
work.
the name of where you work anymore?
I
It's
knew I would
bound
do
to
it this
happen.
podcast. I knew I would do it. If you wanted to get your hands on Loop, loop.microsoft.com, jump on there, straight into the web app, and start making those spaces, and if you can, and make those pages and components and get them shared across Teams chats, and yeah, just give it a go, and see if it is something that can help you during your
Pop
project.
pop quiz. What's the trendy URL for Loop? What's the cool kids URL?
Oh, I don't know.
See,
What is it?
everything's moving to .cloud.microsoft, isn't it? So it's
Oh, okay.
luke.cloud.microsoft. .com. I keep
Yeah,
wanting to
yeah.
put .com on the end, but it's not.
No, yeah. Either of those will work
They
then.
will. All right. Well, good talking to you. I'm sure we will pick something else. Maybe we need to do OneNote next, or maybe we should stick closer to home and pick Teams.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
thank you to everybody and anybody who is out there. Hopefully, we're up and running at 365explained.com.
Yeah.
And the intention is that we'll build up a little library of these things. But for now, I've been Ben. You've been.
Zach.
Thank you very much, and we'll catch you next time. Bye bye.
Cheers all.